Good afternoon. This is After Effects Class 4, the introduction. So I thought today that I would go into importing files that were created in Photoshop, Illustrator, and a audio file. So I'm going to bring those into my project window. So this is going to be a new project. And I'm going to go to my new project window, and I'm going to double click, and I'm going to import some files. So I'm going to import some files that I have put together into a folder, and it's in my documents. And it's right here. So I've got 4 files that I would like to bring in to have ready for me for the compositions that I'm going to be creating. And one is an AI file, one is a Photoshop document, one is a JPEG, and one is an MP3. And I can click on all of them and open them, or I can bring them in separately, one at a time. So now I've got those files ready for me, and I'm going to start working on one of them. I'm going to create a new composition, and I'm going to create a simple animation of a JPEG, a Photoshop document. It was generated by drawing and painting and bringing that stuff into Illustrator. I did some painting in it, and then I brought the file into Photoshop, and then I compressed it all to a JPEG. So it's a flat file. And I'm going to animate an Illustrator file, some vector art, in that composition as well. So I'm going to leave the composition at the width and height of the aspect ratio that I've always been using, 2100 by 1080, and I'm going to leave the background color as white, but you can see that if I click it, I can change the background color to a nice blue. Oh, maybe we'll leave it up blue. Okay, we'll say okay. So that's totally fine. Command plus is going to zoom in if I want to or need to bring this window down, either giving myself more room for the timeline and the layers, or bringing this down and giving me more space to view. I'm going to click on the girl. This is my JPEG. It's 5172 pixels by 5168 pixels. Quite a nice big file. And I can either drop it into the window or drop it into the layers panel. Drop it into the layers panel. Same thing will happen as if I were to drop it into the preview window. The image is going to show up nice and big. And I'm going to zoom out here for you guys and just show you how big this image is compared to my screen. I have made this image, and I'm going to click and I'm going to make it smaller, but I'm pressing shift to make sure the aspect ratio is going to stay consistent and zoom in for you. So you can see my image. I wanted the image to be quite large because I do want to zoom in on her. I want to start this part of the comp, or this part of my animation, quite close. You saw how arresting that was when I brought the image in. Well, I want to start with an extreme close-up. So I'm just going to do a short little demo here, a bunch of short ones for this class, just showing. Now I'm pressing shift while I'm pulling the image out, and of course I can use the transform as well. And here is the position. So my position, right? My scale getting larger. Click on the screen. So there's a bunch of different ways of navigating around. Once you get used to or familiar with After Effects, it will help you and work with you just like Photoshop and Illustrator. So Photoshop and Illustrator are programs that work seamlessly with this program. You can create content with multi-layers and bring it into this program. You can create flat files, you can create all manner of files in the programs, and you can animate the objects that you create. So I've got here, this is my first screen. So I think I'm going to take her down just a little bit. This is with scale. So I've got my playhead at the very beginning. I'd like this to be a little bit, I guess, visually impactful to start with. So I'm going to start with an extreme close-up. She's going to be looking at something. I'm going to be bringing in an illustration that I did in Illustrator. It's a vector file to be playing or animating in front of her eyes. And I'm going to animate that with a puppet warp with pins, and I'm going to animate the little leaves over time. But here we have this first image that you see, and I don't want the viewer to see the image right away. I'd like to start out with a shape layer. So I'm going to create a new layer called shape layer, and then I'm going to add a rectangle to it. I'm going to click and drag out a rectangle as large as my stage, I like to call it, and this rectangle is going to, over time, it's going to reveal itself. Oh, sorry, turn invisible. So this is my rectangle, and this is my transform. My position on the screen is going to stay stable. The opacity is going to change over time. So I'm going to move my playhead farther up, and I'm going to change the opacity to come down to 0. So as the playhead moves forward, we've got this action happening. And if I were to put my playhead, position my playhead at a certain point in the timeline and press N, it makes the workspace that small. If I put my playhead here, I can change it to beginning so that I just pressed a B. So now I have a work area. If I wanted to focus in on a work area, I've got that work area where that is when I press the space bar that the playhead is only going to play that small area of space, so I can really hone in and work on the small area of space. So I want to go back, change this to the beginning, you can see. And I think that the scrim kind of transitions a little too quickly, and all I need to do is move that keyframe up, and we'll see it's a little bit slower now. It comes into play. Okay, and if I obviously did want to move the girl bow forward in time and move her, like have her move in on the screen, or have the view go from extreme close-up to not as extreme, I could move her or transform her over time. So if I put the playhead at the beginning and I give myself a keyframe for scale, move up in time and start to either bring her in or bring her out or move her. So if I wanted to change the position, have her here, and you can see it's kind of interesting, it's moving slightly. So maybe the position, I might want to change it, and I usually change, don't know where would I like this to go, maybe here, because we're going to have some action moving in. It might be good if she got, I think it would be good if she got small, if she was smaller and then got bigger. There we are. And at the point where I know that she's completely still, I'm going to close these up, got my playhead here, and I'm going to bring in my leaves. So I'm going to bring those in. This is an Illustrator file. Bring these in. You can see that they're at the bottom of the layer stack. I can move them up to the front, but not quite. I don't want them in front of the shape layer. I'm going to reposition them. And these are a little bit small. These guys are a vector file, and I can show you what they look like by themselves. So here they are. They are vector illustrations, so they are a bunch of shapes with fill colors. Right now they're on a black background, but really the AI file has no background at all, so it's got an invisible background. So Illustrator and Photoshop, the PSD files, come in with no background, with a transparent layer. And in this case, my transparent layer is showing up as black, but really when we go back and I'll close the footage, you can see that that AI file is coming in with no background at all. So it's a transparency. Since all files are rectangles, sometimes you do want to have transparency travel with your files because you don't want to have big boxes of white and having to have opacity changes and blend modes on every single layer. So prep your files in Illustrator and Photoshop and bring them in and animate them. I'm going to just click and show you what's going on. Not much is happening yet. My girl is going to be watching this go on. There's going to be some movement here. These little plants are going to get larger. Okay, I'm going to start the movement probably right in here. So they're not going to be always moving. So I have my leaves, AI, but my transform, just like every other file that you bring in, every other JPEG, PSD, video file, you can transform by anchor points, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. If I want to add puppet pins, I'm going to pin these Illustrator files. I'm going to pin them and I'm going to animate them. So I'm going to start out with one of them. I'm going to zoom in quite a bit here, and I'm using the space bar, Command plus and the space bar to move my file around. So I've got my pin selected and I'm going to pin in some of the areas that I want to either move or remain stable. So I'm going to start with that one. This is one object that has a mesh applied to it. And I've got my mesh opened up, and I'm going to make the screen a little bit smaller here. And I'm going to deform or move some of these pins. So I'm going to grab my arrow tool and I'm going to move this guy around. Isn't that interesting? So I was moving one of the pins, or two of the pins, but I now have a keyframe where I wanted the movement to start happening. And if I move my playhead further, I can move these into a new place. So I'm animating this plant, and I'm just going to show you by scrubbing through what's going to happen. Okay, and I will playhead move forward. Okay, so right about here is where I have my movement starting to happen. So I'm just going to go ahead and close up my first mesh, and I'm going to start pinning on another one of these little characters that I want to start moving in front of her eyes. So I'm really just placing the pins where I want the movement to be coming from, to be moving. Like, let's think about these pins. It's called a puppet work, and we can think about the pins as though they are the elbows or the wrists or your knees or your ankles, or if you've ever seen a puppet before, we've got that pivot point. So these are the pivot points. So if I want to animate, I'm going to start moving one of these pins around, move into forward. It's going to be just shaking a little bit. maybe getting a little bit bigger. So here we've got animation catch up. And we'll see. It may take a couple seconds for that to catch up, but what I'm doing is I'm animating the just kind of squash and stretch, I guess, or animating the scale and position of the parts of these puppets, and I've just done an air quote, the puppets over time. So here we have my guys moving through time. And they're going to all move. I'm going to have some kind of kooky little dance that happens, and you can see it's going to take me a little time to move these guys over time. And I'm going to continue with these two. I want to really, I guess organize myself really well, because there are a lot of objects here and a lot of areas that I want to have moving. So I'm not going to start pinning all of my vector objects and then go back and try and animate them over time. I'm gonna actually do one at a time. And I'm going to continue through the timeline. Just give this guy a little bit of movement. Move him here. He's going to have a little bit of a dance. And then eventually the camera view is going to zoom out on the girl. Her face is going to be completely revealed, and then something else is going to happen. So that's what's happening here. Just give this guy a little bit of a shake. Move back here. And have this one move slightly. So I want just a little bit of action happening at all times. This isn't really a realistic movement. There's no real wind happening. I just want these guys to be putting on a bit of a show. You can see they're dancing. So I'm going to go back to where the action started. Put some pins in. Oops, and you can see what happens when I've put one pin in, and I haven't like locked down any other of the pins. So this pin is on its own, and this object is pivoting around the anchor point. So I'm gonna try and put that guy back and go back in time, Command Z a couple of times before I put that pin in, and I'm going to go back and now position the pin on the stem, and now start moving in time. I'm going to have this one dance a little bit. Well, that's a little bit of a crazy angle. Wowza! Okay, so hopefully you guys get my drift of what I'm doing here. Quite fun. Okay, so I'm going to end it there, and that is an introduction to bringing in projects or files into your project window, and then creating a new comp and using Puppet Work to add pins or pivot points to your vector-based objects. The fact that vectors are resolution independent, your Photoshop file is resolution dependent, your JPEGs are resolution dependent. These vector-based objects can be edited, they can be stretched and squashed, and they're going to redraw themselves, which is so awesome. We've got the image that I made that was, of course, resolution dependent. That is the large girl image. I've zoomed in on her quite a bit, and I'll just move my playhead forward and zoom in, you can possibly eventually see the pixels, but this is quite a large file. So it's, adequate enough to be able to project on a screen or look at it on a monitor. But I'm going to end that video right here, and I'm going to move on in the next one to a couple of other things.